Welcome to the Neurodivergent Parenting Podcast. I am Melissa Cox, and I'm here because, like you, I'm trying to make sense of this beautiful mess of neurodivergent family life. Parenting is chaos with brief moments of order. Neurodivergent parenting is chaos on steroids. Each week, we'll sink into real conversations about this journey, not the Pinterest perfect version, but the real one where we can share strategies that actually work for us, feel seen, heard, and build a community where we genuinely understand each other. So, whether you're listening while pacing the kitchen for the 10th time today, or finally sitting down after everyone has gone to bed, you're in the right place. Let's figure this out together, one beautifully chaotic day at a time. Today, I have Dr. Angela Kingdon, and I am so excited to talk with her.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am the co-host and producer of the Autistic Culture Podcast. So I am a late diagnosed autistic advocate and author. I help people, mostly autistic, often PDA profile people, to write books. So I'm a ghostwriter and a book coach, and then also a podcaster, which is my favorite thing that I do. And the Autistic Culture Podcast is really a celebration of all the ways autistics contribute to society at large. So if you haven't listened, listen. Have you listened? Do you know our show?
I have followed it so that I can listen soon.
Excellent. Okay, good. Well, I hope you will enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Definitely.
And my special interest as an autistic person is podcasts. So I am a huge podcast listener. I listen to about 2,000 hours a year of podcasts. In fact, I was just listening to one literally up until the second we started recording. And it's my fourth so far today. I have problems.
Yeah, I definitely I think it's a problem. I mean, it's only a problem if it affects your life negatively. Yes. But yeah, I also enjoy podcasts a lot, which is why I'm hosting one again.
Yeah, I totally get it. Me too.
Awesome. So you said that so let's start with some easy ones. You said that you really love musicals. What is your favorite musical?
I do love musicals. I have had many favorites through the year, but my longest special interest musical was definitely Hamilton. So I've seen it about 13 times, all around
Live or
live.
wow.
I saw the original cast on Broadway twice. I got to see Lin-Manuel in Puerto Rico, and I've seen it in Chicago, London, San Francisco, LA. I think those are all maybe one other place. And then obviously Broadway multiple times. So very, very obsessed with Hamilton.
Well, that's exciting. I'm like jealous that you've gotten to see it in like person so much, honestly.
Yeah. And also, have no money from doing that activity. But
I mean,
this is the problem with our
you only live life
once.
You only live life once.
Yes, and I spend my money going to shows obsessively. So, but yes, and I'm very excited. I just got tickets to see Lin-Manuel in his next Broadway show, which is called All In, which is a really cool mixed cast situation. So I'm excited to be going to see that soon too.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah.
So as like part of the podcast, we talk about how we came to realize that we were neurodivergent. There's a couple people who knew that they were neurodivergent from a young age, but a lot of us are late diagnosed. And a lot of us didn't realize that we were neurodivergent until we started having kids and saw them struggling with the same exact things that we struggled with as kids and just didn't know that anything was wrong or that we weren't just broken.
Yeah. It is very interesting because obviously autism is 94% heritable. So if you meet an autistic kid, they have an autistic parent. Almost
Cats don't have dogs.
At least one. Yeah, exactly. So I didn't necessarily know that. I was diagnosed before my kid. And then this makes no earthly sense whatsoever. But you know how you hear about those therapists that were like, I was a therapist and my job was diagnosing people with autism. And I didn't realize I was autistic for like 20 years. Like it happens all the time. They're like,
Yeah.
my job was diagnosing people with autism and I missed that I had autism.
It's
So,
peer review. Peer review is the only kind of diagnosis
right.
I genuinely trust.
I agree with you 100%. So I don't know why. But anyway, I think my kid was about 6 when I was diagnosed as autistic. When I know why this happened, but when my kid was 8, he was in a major car accident. This may or may not be connected. He was in a major car accident with head trauma. And in the middle of 9,000 doctor's appointments, he got diagnosed as ADHD. I never made any connection whatsoever between his ADHD, which was medicated, and my autism. I didn't see those things as related because it was sort of all coming out of the car accident, but maybe it was also just timing. Anyway, I knew I was neurodivergent. I knew ADHD was neurodivergence. I don't know why I didn't get that I had a neurodivergent kid. Like I don't know. And then this year, so that's when he was 8. So this year, 10 years later, he actually got diagnosed as ADHD.
Oh, wow.
It was such a huge, like, I was like, oh, that explains everything. But I was
Yeah.
so close to it for like a decade. How did I not see
Well, do you
it?
think you were so close to it that it was too close, right? I think so often, like with my coaching clients, like I coach parents with who are either ADHD or have kids who are somewhere on the spectrum. Um, and a lot of times we just assume that things are normal because they're normal for us. They're normal for our brains. And like I didn't like my mom, for instance, just now, like the past year or two, has started to accept that maybe she's autistic as well. And it's like, it's taken years of me talking about, like, hey, so this is how I'm autistic, and this is how I respond to things, and this is how it affects me. And she's like, well, that was all just normal. Like, uh-huh. Yeah, that's because cats don't have dogs. And it's just, it's so close, and we only have the information that's in our own brains until we start sharing with other people, listening to other experiences. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that I said, which I'm sure is what my mother, who is not the autistic one, but which is I'm sure is what my mother said about me, was he's just a tough kid. He's a tough kid. Which like there's your clue right there, friends. Like I'm like, I have a stepdaughter who is very neurotypical. And so I would compare him to my stepdaughter and I'd be like, he's not like Sophia. He's a tough kid. Like everything's so easy for Sophia. Sophia's so easy. Jesse's not like that. Everything's hard for Jesse. Like,
That is definitely an experience I don't personally have because I have three and they are all somewhere on that spectrum of ADHD. One is very, very, very ADHD. I also work with kids at a homeschool co-op with like everybody there is some flavor of neurodivergent.
yeah, homeschool.
And yep, because that's why we ended up homeschooling
Yeah.
because
And Jesse,
otherwise
my
I'm up
son
at
was
the place like
homeschooled.
every other day. It's not worth it.
Right. My son was homeschooled and that whole community was all neurodivergent, which I knew. Just like, yeah, it's very interesting. Our support needs are almost indirect conflict, and which I know is an experience that other neurodivergent parents have too. Everything I need to be emotionally regulated, literally since he implanted himself in my womb, is the exact opposite. And we are extremely close and we love each other very much, but wow, do we not live well together.
So that is also a thing that comes up a lot with coaching for me is how do you handle that? Like, I know how I tend to handle the sensory needs, and we have a very low demand environment in our house to keep everyone like with as little to think about or do or try to get done as possible. Which is also why homeschool works so well for us, because if we school was traumatizing. It simply was. Like it was too much all of the time for all of us. And so that helps, but it's all pieces. It's all pieces. What are the ways that you dealt with or deal with still? I don't know if he's living with you still.
He's in university, made it to college.
Okay.
So
that's amazing.
It is amazing. It is amazing. Yeah. So the first thing is low demand for sure. I want to tell a little story in case it's helpful to other people on this. My low demand journey happened when Jesse was about 2. My job was about an hour away. The daycare, you couldn't have your kid at daycare for more than 9 hours. And so the windows were really tight. I had to leave my house at 7 to get him to daycare so I could get to work by 8, so I could leave work on time to get home in time to pick him up in 9 hours. Because if I got any traffic, it was more than 9 hours. And then they charge $15 a minute for every minute. So it's very, very intense. And we had to leave at the exact time. And in order to leave, shoes had to go on feet. And so I would begin yelling about 15 minutes before the shoes needed to go on the feet, and the screaming for the shoes to go on the feet. And this is how I felt. And my entire body was like this, which led to shoes not going on feet. That is one way to guarantee my child's shoes will not go on his feet, is that energy I just presented to you. The shoes are never going on with that energy. So many other things will happen. Many things will happen.
Including tears.
Oh, there's so many things. There will be Broadway shows, but there will not be shoes going on. And every single morning was just a disaster. And I hired a coach, which I recommend everyone do. And the first thing she said was like, well, what if he just doesn't go to school? And I was like, well, then we're dead in a ditch by the river. Like I will lose my job. We will be homeless. Like I had a very long, as all autistics do, catastrophic list of things that would happen that were just unacceptable. And she really made me, just as a thought experiment, play with the idea of what if he doesn't get to school? What if there was just no pressure and he got to school when his shoes went on? And like, what would happen? And this rewrote everything about my life. Just that thought experiment. Like, maybe that wasn't the right school. Like, maybe that wasn't the right job. Maybe I can't work an hour away. Which never occurred to me, because I had a 2-year-old who felt like a thing I owned, like a cat. So the thing had to do what I told the thing to do because I owned it, which was also a revelation that it might not be a thing I owned that I could just control, because I had a job and then I had a baby. And so the baby has to do what the baby has to do because I'm the human and they're a baby. So I had to see my child as a human and make decisions that were, so my job changed, my daycare changed. I mean, it took time. It wasn't like this happened overnight because it was such a revelation, but the alternative was every day was a disaster. And I was not proud of this, but hitting my kid, yelling at my kid, just losing my, forcing, talk about hand over hand, forcing shoes onto my child. Just so many things that I just were so dysregulating to him. Of course, that didn't work for him. So yeah, that was the beginning of our low demand journey. And that journey continued, went into homeschooling and many other things, and really, I would say, destroyed my many relationships, but certainly my relationship with my parents and my sister, who saw me as a permissive parent. For first of all, a bad parent. You let him control your life, like he doesn't have any guidance, he doesn't have any support. It could not be more different. They really felt like homeschooling, like I might as well have just like thrown him in a ditch by the roadside. I'm sure they would tell you I am the worst parent in the world. So super happy, well-adjusted child who has a great, first of all, nobody is a better self-advocate than him. Nobody has a better, with very muted interoception, a better sense of advocating for and identifying their needs. Like everybody goes to my child for that. That's the thing I taught. Like I didn't teach him.
I'm still learning how to deal with my interoception issues.
Yeah, that was all we did. And I would have him write on homework papers like, this math assignment will not determine my success as a human. That would be what he would turn in.
I love that. Some days the only assignment I give my kid, who is very type A, if I let them be, is to go and sit in the yard and be quiet.
Yeah.
I'm like, we need to connect.
Got to homeschooling was because I got called in third grade, I got called into the principal's office. Principal and teacher wanted to have a meeting with me, very concerned about my child's behavior. Every day at lunch, instead of sitting in the cafeteria, he walks around the garden alone. I was like, yeah, so he's emotionally regulating. And so by walking through the garden, it helps him just like calm his emotional, because it's a lot. And they're like, but he doesn't talk to anyone. I'm like, right, because he's right. I'm like, this clearly isn't going to work.
Like, how do I explain to you that none of this is a problem? This is actually really good.
Oh my God.
Doing exactly what he knows he needs.
He's like, other kids are playing soccer. I'm like, yeah, but that won't work for him. That's why he's doing the thing that works for him that you're now making fun of him for. So yes, go sit in the garden. So dude, some days that is the best assignment. Even now, because at 50.
I mean, yeah, like how do we get our brains to calm down? We have to sit down sometimes, or just remember that nothing is an emergency. Like there aren't any emergencies. We think that there are, but there really are very few emergencies in life.
Very few emergencies. And that is just so hard to get. So, and what you have to give up. And by the way, I think this is all capitalism.
Oh, for sure.
So it all comes down to your value is related to your productivity. So if you're just sitting down and you're not playing soccer, like that's opportunities to someday get a scholarship or win a gold medal that you are missing out on, because those are hours. So you got to get your 10,000 hours in of whatever your thing is. What are we doing? Walking through the garden? Like
it's all fear too. It's fear that if we're not busy enough, if we haven't earned rest, if we haven't earned like the ability to sit down, then we will never. It's honestly like as much as autistics can get in that fear loop of like, well, XYZ is going to happen because we know all the patterns, right? Like we know all of the negative patterns that can come of one particular action. And so then we catastrophize it. But neurotypicals do that as well. They're just not really thinking about it. They think that this is the only way it has to work. Like autistics are thought of as having black and white thinking, but neurotypicals also really have black and white thinking a lot of times, because I don't think that they can see often how it could be different.
Mm-hmm. Well, that for sure was a huge part of my journey and why I needed a coach, many coaches. But also why I had a lot that I needed to let go of about what I thought being a good parent was, which part of my definition of being a good parent was that other people would think I was a good parent.
That one's so hard. That
I'm
one's,
sad about it. I had to give that
yeah,
up.
that one's a constant too. It's like, even when you think that you've come to a place where you're like, okay, I'm okay. We're okay. I know that I'm doing the best thing for my kids and myself. And I know that eventually this is going to be really good. Not
Mm-hmm.
just okay, but actually better. But
Mm-hmm.
then I have to like hold on to that feeling inside of me because everything outside of me is telling me what I'm doing wrong.
100%. That is the work. I mean, that is the work, and it is no joke. And
Yeah.
the only thing that keeps me going with that is like the alternative is so much worse for me. I
Hmm.
know what I'm doing is the right thing for my kid, but
Yeah.
really it's about me. As selfish as this might sound, is like I could not live with myself if I tried to be the kind of parent my mom would think was a good parent, or even my
Yeah.
husband now.
Yeah.
So I got remarried, and my husband's autistic, but he has very different opinions about parenting than I do. And one of the things I did is I had two households. So I had a household with my kid that my husband was not a part of, and I had a household with my husband. And that might sound extreme, but the money that I spent on that, which was probably like an extra $50,000 a year, would have been spent on a divorce or something. I don't know. Like it was very cost effective in the end compared to therapy or misery every day. So
That is such an important piece that I feel like people don't talk about enough is like how much we can love someone and not be able to live with them.
yeah,
I
my
can love people all day
issue.
long and I still know that like my best friend, I adore her and if we lived in the same house together, we would unalive each other.
Okay.
Like,
So my issue is tricky because I love my husband and I actually live really well with my husband.
mhm.
Like we live perfectly together. So we're all about order and structure, and everybody has rules and everything has rules and charts and graphs. My son is PDA. He's also ADHD.
Yep.
So structure and timing, and we have to be out the door. So if my husband says we have to be out the door at 9, he really means 8:30, but by 8:30 he means 8, and by 8 he means 7:30
Yep.
wouldn't be a bad idea.
Uh-huh.
My son says 9, he's already like, fuck it, I'm not going then.
Yep.
So with my son, the rule has to be like, aim for 9, but whenever we leave is fine.
Yeah.
And if there's a flight that like really can't be changed, like I always pay for flexible flights. If there's a
Mhm.
flight that really can't be changed, we have to do a lot of preparation for it.
Oh, I have so many systems for traveling.
We need so many systems. So generally, I try and plan trips with my son or anything, haircuts, whatever, that
Yeah.
can be super flexible. I have a general leaving time and I know the window is going to be 2 hours either side. My husband will die. He will just die if we do that.
It's
And
super
so,
dysregulating on both sides because you know that neither of them can help it
no.
and you're in the middle.
And this is a question you asked at the beginning that I have really strong opinions on. And this is a good example of my kid's a kid. So my sensory needs are no one needs to touch me ever anywhere.
Yep.
And Jesse's sensory needs are I need to be touching people, ideally my mother, as hard as possible at all times.
Yeah.
So he needs a lot of pressure and compression. And the stickier his hands are, the more he wants to put them on my face. My face needs to
Yeah.
never be touched by any humans or
Yeah.
cats or anyone really.
Yeah.
However, he is the child.
Yeah.
And so I very conscious. So it's masking and it's fucking damaging, but I
Yeah.
very consciously make a decision and I like set a bubble and a time limit around it. Like I know when I am in my household with my son, I'm going to sit on a couch and he is going to sit way too close to me and touch me way too much while insisting he is not touching me. I understand that's going to happen. He also really stims a lot. And so I specifically have many things in my possession like this for him to stim, which he will insist he's not stimming. But I know like these things are going to get broken. Every remote control that has a battery thing, that's going to need to be clicked on and off
Or
as many
the rubber thing that goes over the remote control for like the Fire Stick. We have gone through so many of those.
So many of those. I can't even, all of those things are going to be fidgeted with. So I
Yeah.
just buy them that way. But like my husband gets something and like keeps it perfect and does not want it to be ruined. And like I actually live better with him, but I didn't give birth to him. I gave birth to Jesse. I am a parent. And so I, within limits, create a lot of space for that at a lot of fucking expense, which is why I also like love my child more than life itself. But if I had to do it all over again, would not have kids.
I hear that from so many autistic and ADHD parents because we don't know, like it doesn't, I mean, it's with any parent. You can't explain to a parent, you can't explain to a person before they have children everything that it will entail. You know, you can try, but it doesn't make sense until you have a kid, which is not to say that like a person without kids can't understand some of the struggles, but like to live the experience is just unexplainable.
Such a huge decision that you have no idea what you're making. I really did think I was buying something. It felt very consumery.
I will say, like, I tell people this sometimes, and I know by their response if they are very autistic or not. And when I was pregnant with my first child, it was the most I had ever felt like a mammal.
Oh, yes.
It's just a completely like, oh, this is what my body does. I do this. And it was a very disconnected feeling. Like, you know how they describe men, especially not having that connection with the baby until it's born? I also didn't really have that connection until the baby was born. Like, and obviously, like, I'm very close to my children now, but like, it was a very bizarre feeling to like that this was just mine. This was just my human, and now I have to care for it.
Yeah. It's a ridiculously huge, if you actually think about what a huge responsibility it is, like a lot. Well, maybe more people are thinking about it because birth rates are going down, but I feel like
I do think it's definitely talked about more now.
It's a very big deal. And it is, if I think about what I could have done with the definitely over $1 million, definitely like now we're at close to 20 years from beginning of pregnancy journey to now, with $1 million in 20 years, if you just took a kid and all that time,
I
could have done something. I mean, I could have had a lot more episodes of my podcast. I could have had a show on Broadway. Like there's so many
all
things.
sorts of things.
$1 million, 20 years, and easily an extra 40 hours a week of energy.
Yeah. Like, I mean, my sister has always known that she never wanted children, like from she was tiny when she decided she never wanted children. And that is amazing that she had that self-knowledge. But I think about sometimes I'm like, she's doing so much better than I am. And I'm like, oh yeah, I have 3 kids. Like,
it's a huge project. It's a huge project. And there's that quote, it's the toughest job you'll ever love, which really does like say it all, except for it seems to emphasize the love part and not the toughest job. You sort of blow past, it's the toughest job you'll ever love. Oh, you're going to love it so much. There's nothing better than parenting.
You're also really going to hate it sometimes.
Toughest job. You don't know what, think of the toughest job you ever did. Like, did you ever have like an exploding toilet where you're like cleaning shit? Like so much harder than that. All day, every day for 20 years. You cannot quit this job. Well, I guess you can quit, but
Also, there are so many more bodily fluids for so much longer than people like to say to new parents. Like the bodily fluids happen for longer than you think they're gonna.
And medical shit. Like
Yep.
my kid got mono last year, and I had to look at like pussy back of throat daily. He wanted to like take pictures once an hour and send them to me, and no one else is going to look at the pussy back of your throat. I don't want to look at the pussy back of anyone's throat. I don't.
Yeah,
Don't.
that's
That's
fair.
part of the job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes try to not do it, and he totally notices. He's like, "But did you look at it? Did you see the dots though? Did you see where it's red?" I'm like, "Yeah, it looks really bad." He's like, "Are you looking?"
It all looks bad, honey.
So bad. So
So, we were talking about pregnancy, and you mentioned how you had a really difficult time in pregnancy, especially.
I did. And actually, if you do listen to an episode of our podcast, listen to Pregnancy as Autistic. I go through my whole journey. I don't think we have enough research on what pregnancy is like for autistic people. Everything in that stupid book was not for me. The what to expect for not for me. I don't understand what that was. It was not helpful, and I had all of the negative physical reactions. So I, for instance, have always had a very strong sense of smell. So it's one of my biggest sensory issues is smell, which I mean sounds fine, or like how big of a deal could that be? Let me tell you, during pregnancy, everything smelled. It smelled so badly I could not leave my home, but like I had to do things like work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was constantly, I always had wide mouth bottles of Gatorade, and I just threw up all day, every day, all 10 months. Also, the whole 9 months is a lie. It's almost 10,
Oh my goodness, yeah.
40 weeks.
9 months gives you
Yeah.
hope, and it's
Yeah.
not.
There's no hope to be had. So yeah, so I was so sick. I was so uncomfortable. There was no bliss for me of anything. And then the medical gaslighting
Mm,
was just insane for me. I would ask what I thought were very basic questions. Like I needed a lot more information about what was happening.
yeah,
And there are a lot of things that are set up in pregnancy that we do them because they're on a checklist.
yeah.
So at week 12, we do this. At week 15, we do that. And so, they would want, I forget, week 32 or something, they did an ultrasound. So I'd be like, why are we doing that? What are the good things? What are the bad things? Like, what are the
Yep.
reasons? What are we looking for? Because why are we, and they're like, no, because we do it because you're a 32 week. I'm like, I know, but what are we looking for? And they're
But
like,
why?
the size of the baby. I'm like, okay, well, what will the size of the baby tell me? And they're like, when the baby's coming. And I'm like, don't we know when won't the baby be coming when I go into labor? Do you do something to start the labor sooner? No. Okay. So if the baby's really big, do we schedule a C-section? Is that why we're doing this? No, we're probably
That
not
would
going
have been
to C-section.
wonderful if I had
Right.
known
No,
that.
we're not going to do that. So, okay, but what are we looking at? What are we looking to see if the heartbeat stopped? Because I don't think you need an ultrasound for that. We could just do a heart rate monitor. And then they were like all over my chart, like refusing medical, whatever. Like I got kicked
They're
out of the
taking
doctor's
all of
office.
your questions as refusals.
Right. I'm like, I'm not refusing. I'm like, literally, please explain to me. And the answer was, I don't know. I've just been told to do this. But neurotypicals don't like to say those words.
Yeah.
And so I would just keep pressing them. I'm like, I understand we're checking the baby's size. What is the purpose of checking the baby's size? What is a good size and what is a bad size? What are we looking for? And they would be like, refused medical interventions. I'm like, not
Mm,
refusing, just don't understand why we're doing that. And then I didn't understand I was stepping into like political arguments I wasn't trying to have.
yeah.
I didn't understand what was happening. I just needed more information, which, like, the medical system is set up for you to be a good girl and listen to the big
Yes.
smart.
Even as you die. Even
Even
as
as
you
you
die.
die. Correct.
I had a very traumatic second birth. It was an emergency C-section, and it was not a fun time. My second child was 11 pounds 3 ounces, and the
They should
biggest
have done an
child
ultrasound, because if the
that had
baby was
ever been born at that hospital. It was also 2 weeks late. It was a whole mess. It was a whole mess.
and
But
were they trying to induce you sooner?
they Pitocin never worked on me ever. Which is another thing I wish that we had more information about is like autistic, like biological differences. Because
Well, I'll tell
we
you what
have,
didn't work on me is the fucking epidural.
so they gave me one and it didn't work. And they were like, we can give one more try. And it did.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a whole disaster with my epidural that ended up in a crash C-section.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, birth in general is so much more dangerous than people act like it is. It's just, and then if you add on marginalized identities,
I was going to
it
say, especially
becomes,
that white people act like it is. Black women, no, they
yeah,
got the
and it's
memo.
just terrifying. And I don't think people, I don't know, I think it's becoming a bigger conversation, but it needs more because I talk to even friends now who have had children in the past like year or so, and I try to tell them like, your hormones are not going to calm down for a couple of years. Like, you're not going to feel normal, like you're normal, for at least a few years. And people don't warn us. They don't warn us. And because we no longer live in tribes, we no longer live in communities that are close with ancestral knowledge, like, we don't get that passed down to us in helpful ways. It's all disconnected.
Yeah, for sure. It is definitely, the entire system, particularly in the US, where we're so controlled by insurance,
Mm-hmm.
is not set up for autistic people. It's really not set up for women, but it's really not set up for autistic people. And if you are pregnant, it's almost impossible to find a doula that has experience with autistic people. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you have to figure it out yourself. And if we did have more diagnosed autistic women, it would be so amazing to have that knowledge passed down through our aunts and our grandmothers and our mothers. And so few of us have that in our culture. I don't know about
I
other
think
cultures, but
I will say, like, since I've become part of the coaching world, which, like, prior to being part of the coaching world, I definitely had like judgments because just that name felt very, I don't know, like unregulated, which it is. But at the same time, I have found that it's a place where people who didn't fit into their chosen professions in the systemic way that that profession functions often tend to end up in the coaching world, like doulas ending up in the coaching world because, or relatively close to it, because they are autistic or ADHD and they don't necessarily philosophically match with nurse practitioners and doctors and tend to connect better to the other people who also don't philosophically match with the way that therapy is set up or the way that um, academics are set up sometimes.
mm-hmm.
We are building our own system in a way.
Yeah, well, that is the only way. That's the same thing with school. Like, I have for shorthand said here, Jesse was homeschooled, but it was actually like so many autistic people. It was so much more complicated than that. Just sounds like we sat down at the kitchen table and I
Yeah.
read him, I don't know, Christian texts or something. Like it was not that. It was a cobbled together,
Yep.
creative, evolving system that was different every year. And because we have to build our own systems. And also as autistic people, neurodivergent people, we have to know our support needs are going to change. Their
Yeah.
dynamic disabilities. And
Yeah.
so for Jesse, there were completely different issues and completely different needs going through puberty that just needed to be handled. And also things I figured out later, but now make sense. Jesse had a lot of growing pains that he was dealing with a lot of pain that we didn't know how to address. There were a lot of doctor's appointments. Well,
Does he
now,
have Ehlers-Danlos?
yes,
Yeah. Yep.
makes so much sense now, but we didn't know. It took a while to get diagnosed. And now, like, physical therapy is a big part of our lives, and there's a bunch of things we do differently, but you don't know that. So it's like you can't walk in the door and be like, oh, we need an accommodation for gym class. You don't know what's happening as a parent. It
Yeah.
takes a long time to uncover these things, and the school systems aren't set up for that. So we just have
No.
to get him out of the school completely because he couldn't do gym, which sounds nonsensical, but we couldn't get an accommodation because we didn't have a diagnosis, because we didn't even know
Um,
what Ehlers-Danlos was.
the
And
chicken and egg situation of having a diagnosis so that you can get a diagnosis of
right, right, totally.
it's infuriating and like a large reason why we also chose to take them out and figure out how to make homeschool work.
Yeah. And then when you address certain things, so once we got a lot of that figured out by the time he was 13 or 14, it became super important to him to play sports. And
Mm, yeah.
now being in school was more important because he wanted to be part of a team that was part of school. So there were
Yeah.
different accommodations we needed to make because there were different, because all kids are dynamic, like kids are
Yeah.
changing, they're growing. But then when you add neurodivergence, it's like you're constantly needing to weigh those things, and society's expectations are that you aren't going to be making quite
That
so.
everyone will just naturally find a way to fit into the box and everyone will naturally just go along to get along and find the path that they are already comfortable with, that the system is comfortable with.
Yeah, well,
And
the
oh,
people around me were very concerned, like, how is he going to learn? Like, sometimes you just have to go along to get along. Like, sometimes you have to suffer. Like Matt, my podcast co-host, always says, have you
life
tried
is suffering.
suffering? Yeah, they're like, well, what about when he's at his job and he doesn't want to do it? He just doesn't have to do anything that's hard. You have to do hard things in life. And I'm like, right, but he's 12 and his knees hurt. So maybe you don't have to.
I think also a way to, so I've also had that a lot, and I wonder if the answer really is you have no idea how many things are hard in my day that I just never mention.
Right.
Like, if, yes, you're looking at this one thing that my kid is having trouble with, everything is hard.
Right.
Everything.
Right.
You can't tell me that I have to add on an extra hard thing just because you can't see all of the little hard things that have added up so that they are constantly in a battle with themselves to do the things that are basic necessities.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And then for me, it was always like this autistic need to document, categorize, and prove why these are the right decisions. And
Yes.
that the energy to just like explain it to the doctor, the therapist, oh God, I haven't even mentioned that all of this is done in a contentious divorce situation. So
Mm,
my child's father, who is not in any way a co-parent, but just an obstacle to
yeah.
everything in my life, like, so all of that, like, extra documentation and feeling like at any moment I'm going to get my kid taken away from me, which I think a lot of us deal with, not only in divorce situations, but in like court situations or school situations.
Uh-huh.
That's
And just out in the community, if you have a kid that doesn't fit into the norm, and some of our kids like to wander, some of our kids like to it one of my kids, for instance, has a lot of PDA, and the more you try to control him, the more he is going to fight. So I very carefully weigh how dangerous is this situation. And
mm-hmm.
to me, I know him and I know his abilities and like how he will respond to situations, but nobody else watching can see that. Like nobody else watching knows that. So what they see is very different from what I see. I see a
Mm-hmm.
kid figuring things out. I see a kid who knows how to trust his body because I have trusted him to trust his body.
Mm-hmm.
And other people see him taking big risks. And I'm like, okay, but comparatively, this is a small risk.
Right. Yep.
And
100.
also, I mean, I don't know if you ever read Terry Pratchett, but he's he was like a fantasy author,
Yeah.
Discworld
Republican?
series. He it's Discworld series and a
Yeah.
lot of others. He was
Yeah.
also the co-author of Good Omens,
Yeah. Okay. Totally.
and he had the character Death. And there's like a comic that goes around sometimes, especially I don't know. It's just Death talking to someone and like, isn't she like knives are dangerous? Why did you give that child a knife? And it's like to learn a lesson. Like, well, what if the child hurts themselves? Well, that will be a very important lesson. And just it sounds terrible, but at the same time, like I teach my kids how to use I was a pastry chef many years ago. That was my first profession. And I want them to understand how knives are dangerous and how to use them safely. And I want them to understand how their bodies are comfortable and how they can move their bodies in safer ways and how to judge what is safe and what is not. Spatial awareness is something
Oh
we
God.
focus on a lot. Like
I
just
get why. Yeah.
being aware of our bodies in relation to everything else.
Mm-hmm. Huge. Huge. Yeah, no one's going to understand your parenting, and that's the biggest takeaway is you getting comfortable with that is such a journey. For me, that is all about me. For me, that is the only way I can live with myself, both as a parent, but also just as a human.
Yeah.
Like, I just have to put my own emotional regulation and my sensory needs first. And in order to do that, low demand parenting was the only way I could do it. So, like, there are a whole bunch of things my child needs from me. A lot of them had to do with, I literally carried my kid till he was 6, almost 24/7, like koala style, like I was a baby wrap. And he had to be carried like very close, like compression holding all the time. And what that meant, and I did that happily. I understood he needed that. That was the only way he could emotionally regulate. I hated every minute of it, but I did it. But what that meant was we weren't ever going to do bedtimes like other people. Like we co-slept and we went to bed together. There was none of this. I love these adorable parents that put their children down at 6:30. That was not ever in the cards for me. And I have no judgment to other people,
I
but
am a little jealous,
right,
but
exactly. Like, right, great. Like if you, that was
yeah.
never work. And then people would have to say to me, their mouths would say it, would be like, oh, you should like put him in the room, give him a stuffed toy, and then just like put the sides up on the crib and just let him I play some music. I play some night, like we have a Sonos, then I play some nice music. I'm like,
That's
I
good
don't
for you.
think word
Thanks
for
for the
Jesse,
info.
but thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you.
that has never been my experience with sleep.
No, it's
Sleep
just,
is a whole thing with neurodivergent kids.
yeah. And it just wasn't ever going to work that way. So there were lots of, I'm a very extremely sensitive eater. There are 10 things I will eat. And the number of lectures I got from strangers
Yep.
about only letting my child or only feeding my child mac and cheese. I literally only fed my child mac and cheese. Would you like to know why? That is what my child ate. Also, I don't cook. I'm not going to start cooking. I have a lot of sensory issue. Like I don't touch meat. I don't touch, like I'm not cooking. What we can do mac and cheese. That's what we can do in our house.
Yeah.
That, and if you can do better with your child, that's great. You want to make your child sit at the table for 12 hours until they eat, like you do you, boo. I don't know what to tell you, but I needed to know in my heart that I was doing my best because the pressure from outside is relentless.
Hmm.
And your answer to yourself matters more than what you say to them. I mean, I would say, thanks, good idea. Doesn't matter
That's
what I say to
really
them, what you
all
say
you
to
can
yourself.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you. The only way that I've learned how to deal with people like that is to A, avoid them if at all possible,
Yes.
and B, like boundaries of I didn't ask for your opinion. I don't care if I'm being a bitch. I don't care anymore. I will be a bitch. Like I got more comfortable with being a bitch when it became my kids living or dying.
Right. And
Because
also me living or dying.
yeah,
Like, how about that? Like, I'm
yeah.
like, that's not how we do it in our family.
Yeah, I do tell my kids a lot because I try to help them become reasonably adaptable, polite human beings because I do value politeness in, you know, circumstances where the other person is being polite or we just need to avoid them. And I try to remind them like, okay, well, different people do different things in their own houses. Different families work different ways. Because a lot
Yeah.
of times they'll wonder to me, like, why is that such a big deal for them? Like, why is the adult punishing the kid for a specific behavior? And I'm like, other people have different ways that they operate in their family, and we have no control over that. I talk a lot about how much control we do not have over other people, too.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Because I understand that desire for justice and that desire for things to make sense, and they just don't.
Yeah. And they're not going to in
No.
this particular lifetime. So now what are we going to do knowing that? Like, now what do
Yeah,
we
it's a
do?
lot of yes anding. It's a lot of, okay, well, that's how they're
Mm-hmm.
operating. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing instead? What works for us? And yeah, lots of putting our face mask on first, our like airplane mask on. I love how you mentioned taking care of your own needs first, because that is so important for autistic and ADHD neurodivergent parents. Is it's easy to get caught up in the idea that you should do everything for your child and you should make sure that you put them first in every situation. But a lot of us, if we did that all of the time, we would burn out so hard that we can't care for them anymore.
Right.
And
Which is why you have to figure out what your needs are. And I think
mm-hmm,
that's one of the hardest parts
yep,
of the process is like, so, okay, I knew from mean and visceral reactions, I did not like being touched with sticky hands. So you know things about yourself, like
Yeah.
neurodivergent or not, right? So I would be touched with sticky hands, and then I would be like, "Stop touching me," and I would say something really mean. What I didn't understand was that that was a need that I had that was valid, to not be touched with sticky hands. I didn't know how to advocate that in advance. So, for instance, when something sticky is coming out, I didn't know I needed to always have wipes with me. You just need a packet of wipes
Yeah.
in every single room. You need one in your purse. They need to be everywhere. It's going to look ugly. That's what your house is going to look like. There's just going to be wipes everywhere. And I didn't know that I needed to be ready to support my needs, because kids' hands are going to get sticky. God knows with what. They were always fucking sticky for
Jam
like a day.
hands.
I don't understand. So I had to know what that need was way in advance, like at Target the week before it happened. And then I needed to somehow convince myself that it wasn't a waste of money to spend $20 on wipes, to have wipes for the car that were the right size and for each room. Because that I had to get through a lot of money blocks of like, I
Mm-hmm.
should have one pack of wipes and just like carry them around. No, I'm
But
not
is
going to
that
do.
working?
It's not
That's the
working.
constant
I
question it
need.
has to come back to is that effective?
Right.
And the answer is very often no. So it doesn't matter what I want it to be. What do I actually need it to be?
Right. So for me, I always had to have wipes. They had to be in every room. They had to be in my purse. They had to be in my car. That meant they got dried out. They didn't always
Yep.
get used. Like I was violating laws of spendthriftness.
Yeah.
And I need to be prepared for that, because what was going to happen otherwise is sticky hands were going to go on my face. I was going to yell. I might even hit my kid, because that would sometimes happen. Then I would feel like shit, and the whole night
Yeah.
would be ruined, plus therapy that was going to cost a lot more than the
Yep.
fucking wipes. If I just was honest with the fact I have some
Mm-hmm.
major touch issues that are different than other people's, and so much shame around that. Why couldn't I just get over it? Other moms can get over it. And instead, like, knowing
Yeah.
your need, be honest about your need, support your need, don't
Yep.
shame yourself for your need. Like, those are very hard things to do. And it's just
They're
fucking $20
super
worth of
hard,
wipes. It doesn't seem like it should be.
but
And there's like so many of those.
yeah, there's just so much wrapped up in that. Like there is so much shame. There is so many, like there are so many stories about what all of the things that we need are about, like why we want to have a reason. And even though there are reasons, like often neurological reasons that we have those needs, um the point that I come back to is that it doesn't actually matter. Like none of that is the important part. The important part is that I do. The important part is me facing reality over and over and over again instead of what I should do. Like I always tell people, like we don't should on ourselves. We just accept what is and try to make room for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and it's with my kids
And
too.
in
Like,
modeling that, I feel like those are the best gifts you can teach your kids. One of the things, so I was pretty committed to advocating for my needs, and I was very committed to teaching Jesse. His main job was to understand and advocate for his needs. That was I wrote it down in many journals. It was my parenting mission. I had a mission statement. I had placemats. Like I knew what I was doing. When he was about 15, he came to me and said, I don't like living with you. I know what my emotional needs are. I know what my physical needs are. And it is very stressful for me. And I am in a constant state of fight or flight living with you. I would like to live with my father. And I was like shocked, hurt, destroyed, devastated.
yeah,
And sort of at the same time, I was like, shit, that is exactly what I taught him. That is exactly what I would want for him, is like
yeah,
identify and advocate for your needs. And there are lots of reasons that individuation, 15-year-old boy, time of this,
yeah,
like who cares what the reasons were? He identified what his need was and he advocated for it.
Yeah.
That's what
Every time my kids tell me, hey, something is bothering me, like, especially if it's a thing that I'm doing, I'm like, thank you. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah. When I was 15, I was super dysregulated. I need to get out of my house. I was obviously undiagnosed and I became an exchange student in a very interesting and creative way. But I found a way to get the hell out of my house. And then when I came back, I went to college early. So I like got out of my house basically around 15. Like when I watched what he was doing, I was like, oh, I needed to get out of my house too. And if my parents were divorced, for sure I would have done the exact same thing. I would be like, oh, I want to live in that house. I didn't have that
Yep.
option. So I came up with Australia. Like, but
Yeah.
dude, like, yeah, good call. I taught you that. You're welcome.
That's the
But also
goal.
devastating as a mom, you know, like I was
Yeah.
devastated until I kind of put it together. Like, oh, I created
Yeah.
this monster.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like so a couple of things that have come up in this conversation are they make me remember that we need community with people that have similar struggles as we do, because that helps us to remember that we are doing the right things for our own family and we're not crazy. We're just different. Like I mean, we might be crazy too. That's okay. But like we it's not damaging to do things very differently if that's what works for us and our family. And hearing that from other parents, hearing that from the community around us is life changing. Like having another parent, I think I met one of my best friends when at some point right after my second child was born. And just being able to talk very, very real conversations about how hard things were made everything a little bit less hard
Mm.
without judgment. Like we didn't judge each other because we both knew we were like, this shit is hard. It's, you're not crazy. And I see that you're trying. I know that you're trying. It's just hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's just very, I was in were you in those mom groups? So
I
like,
never stayed in the online ones for very long, and I found that friend through a craft group. So
yeah.
it was like a
Well, mine were, so Jesse was born in 2006. There definitely was an internet, but it was much more in person. There were these like everybody that was due at the same time, and you would like
you'd
meet
meet
up
up and have them
at the park.
play. Yeah,
Yeah. And those were obviously like autistic social problems. Those were like so awkward and terrible
I
for me.
hated them.
And they were such like evidence that I was doing it all wrong that I mean, I would go, but I would either play with the kids or I would like sit alone on a bench and look at my phone. I don't know what I did. They were awful. I tried, it wasn't for me. But if I were to go back and do it again, like the one thing I would look for would be another neurodivergent mom.
It was,
Parent,
yeah,
be a
it was
mom. I
accidental
did not.
too.
Yeah.
It was
I
that I
I
think a
obviously
lot of
wasn't.
neurodivergents ended up in that craft group because I mean, crafts are one of my fixations, right? They're one of my special interests. So it makes sense that I met other neurodivergent people in that craft group. And then we happened to have kids about the same age, like almost exactly the same age. And then we were like, hey, are you going crazy this morning? Do you want to like have coffee together at one of our houses? It's like, yes, I absolutely do. Thank you.
Yeah, support is so key because you will just feel like you're losing your mind. And Yeah, I guess people have partners, but
It's
having a
a
kid,
different,
it's a different thing. Yeah.
it's also, even if you have a supportive partner, it's a different kind of support because you're both in it
Yeah.
24/7,
Right.
and you only have the experience of your children as
Hmm.
opposed to comparing to other similar but like different children, where I could be like, okay, well, we are obviously struggling with similar things with our kids, like sleep, for instance. Sleep was always one of the biggest for us. And comparing that with a friend where they're also like, yeah, I don't fucking know. Like, it made it less, it
Right.
made there be less shame
Yeah, for sure.
because I wasn't just hearing from books that I tried to read and tried to implement. And
Oh yeah. Those
all of the
books.
books were so disheartening.
Mm-hmm.
And other parents who are just like, I don't know, you just lay them down and you just like wait for them to cry it out. And I'm like, so you wait for like 3 hours? And they were like, no, it doesn't take 3 hours. And I'm like, yes, it does.
Yeah, it would with my kid. My
It
kid
wouldn't even, it would
literally
take three
sleep
hours and then I
for
would go give
18
up.
months. Right. Yeah, no, yes, that was insanity. There's so much advice in the world, just taking this outside of parenting for a minute. There is so much advice that
Hmm.
is given with so much confidence that is so
Yeah.
unapplicable to neurodivergent people. So, just as an example, and this is another episode of the Autistic Culture Podcast, is productivity is autistic. The book Atomic Habits, one of the greatest bestsellers of all time. If you ask ADHD people their favorite book, they will tell you it is Atomic Habits. You will then ask them, which atomic habits exactly have you used? And they'll be like, none of them, but I love them all. They love reading this book.
Yeah.
None of the techniques in Atomic Habits, they are almost all based on uh, 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 autonomization or habituation, which comes from synaptical pruning, which neurodivergent people do not have access to.
Nope.
Those tools will not work for us. You can like the book, you can wish you were that person, you can read it like fiction or some sort of Orwellian
Yeah.
future. You are not going to be able to do those things. They don't work for us. But
Yep.
the confidence with which James Cleary, but like white dudes in general are really good at this, of just like
You have so much confidence.
like the doctor Ferber, the cry it out
Oh,
guy.
who I
He
wish I could like just, mm,
Ferberize him with your
yeah.
hands. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, it's like, here's what you will do. You will lay your child down. You will shut the door. You will listen to your child cry for a few minutes. They will stop crying. So much confidence that you're like, am I doing it? Did I lay him down wrong? Did I shut the door wrong? Maybe I made too much noise shutting the door. Am I wearing the wrong shoes? Maybe it's my perfume. No, it's bad. It's fun, and it doesn't work for neurodivergent, and it doesn't work for neurodivergent mamas. And it's
It was
and
physically painful. It was
so
physically painful to hear my
like
babies
you don't
cry. And
understand hyper empathy, you don't understand sensory sensitivities, you what are you fucking talking about, dude? Really? And like the entire world, and sadly most of coaching, is littered with one size fits all solutions that mostly fit the person. Just look at the person who is giving the advice. That is who it is
yeah,
for. That is the one
yep,
person it's good for. And if you get
yep,
some inspiration from it, great. But if I'm
yeah,
more, this is why I believe in like working one-on-one with coaches and
yeah,
not like recorded programs. Not that you can't, I love books, like not that you can't get some ideas, but
yeah,
books are to give you ideas.
yes,
Coaching one-on-one is meant to help you customize those ideas into what works for you, not
yes,
somebody's like big grand plan of what might work for everyone on the planet.
yeah.
How does this actually operationalize in your life?
How can we make it applicable?
Right. And Can you do that on your own? Like sometimes. So like sometimes
slowly, and sometimes with a lot of effort. It's
but
easier.
like
Like one of
when it comes to my sister is
Mhm.
so good. I don't under Libra moon. I don't know what it is, but her design aesthetic, she'll like walk in and she'll foof a pillow in a way I cannot foof a pillow. Like she folds blankets better than you should see the way she wraps presents. Like I don't, so she could just see something, like read a
Mhm.
book or scroll through something on Pinterest, and then she does it and she does it even better.
Yeah,
I, however, would need someone to sit next to me, namely my sister, and wrap every fucking present with me because I'm never going to get it's just not in there. Like, I am going to need help with that. So, I do think there are certain things that certain people can read a book and just like, shush, they're like, oh, yes, I just do this, this, and this. But if something is hard for you, like literally getting my kids' shoes on was like
yeah,
causing months of daily tears. If something's that hard for you, you would have, if putting your kid down and letting him cry was going to work, you would have just come up with that. The idea is in the air. You would have seen it on a sitcom. You would have just tried it once. It would have worked. That would have been that. If you're trying for months and months and months and it's not working, that's just not for you. That's not going to be your thing.
yeah.
That's not going to work for you.
Yeah,
Like you
I
need
love
to
something
solution.
my coach says is she asks so many questions at the beginning. Like most of the first few sessions at least are her asking like, can you explain that more? Can you describe that part for me? And how does that work for you? And by the time she actually gets to the point where she gives you advice, she knows plenty of information about you specifically so that she can customize it for you. Because that's hopefully what a coach does, right? Is you're trying to make it work better for that person. Not like I like doing small workshops with like 4 people or so because
Mm.
I think that feedback is helpful
Get
too.
ideas from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also know that there's certain work that can only be done one-on-one because you need to feel comfortable. And it's hard to get that level of comfort and just ability to be vulnerable with other people that you don't 100% trust. Trust
Mm.
is really hard for me, for a lot of autistics, ADHDers, because we've spent years not trusting ourselves, not trusting our responses to things, not
So true.
trusting that we're doing things right because everybody around us is telling us, well, that's not how that works, or that's not how you feel. That's how I
Mhm.
feel.
Right.
So,
Totally.
yeah, building trust with my kids is a huge thing. I want them to trust themselves. I want them to trust that they know themselves the best. And like you said, advocate for that because they're the only ones who can.
Yeah. And that is not a normal thing. Like, I think we think you're going to learn that. I don't know. You're going to turn 18 and learn it. You're going to learn it when you're 30. I don't know when or how we think people learn that. I know how I learned it, fucking trauma.
Yeah,
Like,
hard lessons
right. But
of
like,
ending up in bad situations over and over again
and
and then
it's
having
not
to be like, I don't like this.
right. And it's so hard to like undo the people pleasing. It's actually not that hard to just teach, like, oh, what are your needs here? How do we advocate for like
Yeah.
it's that nobody teaches that. I feel like it's a very low priority. Like Pythagorean theorem ranks much higher than that. And yet, what do I use every day?
Because
Like,
it doesn't pay anything. It doesn't make
right.
anybody money to advocate for our needs.
And if anything, loses money, pain in the ass.
Yeah.
It's like all these neurodivergent people now expecting all these handouts.
Because then you have to listen to people too. You have to listen and you have to have conversations and pay attention and treat people as individuals instead of cogs in a wheel.
Yeah, totally.
I'm so glad that we had this conversation. It was wonderful and winding and the way that most of my favorite conversations happen.
Yay. Yeah, it's a tough journey, neurodivergent parenting, and I do think it has like rewarding moments for sure, but if it feels harder than it should be, then you're probably doing it the way the rest of us have. It's really hard. It's really hard. And it doesn't have to be hard and a payoff. It can just be hard. It's just a situation you're in that is really fucking hard, and it is what it is. You got to
Yeah.
just keep going. You've got yourself in this situation. Now you got to find ways to make it more and more bearable every day.
And trusting yourself that you can do that. With the right support, it's easier, but
Yeah.
you can trust yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Was there any, let's mention what media you put out into the world so that people can find you and where they can find you.
Yeah. So the best way to find me is at autisticculturepodcast.com. We do 2 episodes a week for autistic people and those who love us. And there are also some blogs up there and things like that, ways to get involved in our community of autistic people and allies. And then I'm also a book coach and a ghostwriter, and you can learn more about that at angelakingdon.com.
That's fantastic. This was all fantastic.
This has been an episode of the Neurodivergent Parenting Podcast with Melissa Cox. We are part of the Neurodiversity Media Network. You can find the Neurodiversity Media Network on YouTube and anywhere that podcasts are. You can find Melissa Cox on Facebook at Melissa Cox, Blue Sky at melissa-cox.bsky.social, on TikTok and Instagram at living_with_disaster. And you can always catch us right here again for the next episode. Thanks for joining us.